Welcome in to the newest episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. We just watched a few moments ago the season finale of Andor, season 1, episode 12. It was I thought, a really good episode. We're gonna talk about it, break it down a little bit today. But first of all, Joey, it's good to see you. I've been with you for the past few hours, but nonetheless, it's good to see you. And we had some fun watching the episode. Excited to break it down. But how's your day been so far? What's new with you?
Pretty pretty good. As you know, Fall Guys dropped yesterday
Mm,
outside of our Star Wars Hoth Hangout world,
yeah.
and it was fun seeing everyone's reactions to it. I actually hadn't watched any Twitch or Twitter or anything all day yesterday because I was streaming late last night to make sure that I had the full experience of, seeing everything for the first time. So that was pretty cool. But now that I'm able to look at everyone else's stuff, I'm like, oh wow, there's all these skips and speed runs already, so that's a lot of fun to see. But yeah, now we just watched the last episode of Andor. Yeah, it's I would say the past 24 hours have been pretty good.
Yeah, it seems like yesterday especially. And as a side note, if you're here just because you're a Star Wars fan, first of all, we appreciate you. But second of all, if you want to check out either of our Twitch streams, we both do stream over there on Twitch, which is what we were talking about here a second ago. But it seemed like a lot of video game uh, updates came out yesterday. At least with a couple different games I play, there were like really big updates with, of course, with Fall Guys, and Dead by Daylight had a big update, and
Just Dance came out yesterday as
yeah,
well.
Just Dance. You know, I giggle because, anyways, there's an inside joke I have with someone about Just Dance as a game, but I did play it growing up, and I actually kind of like that game. But
Oh,
uh,
you have enough room to stream that in the background there?
yeah, let me just get my VR headset out, and we'll do a little Just
Yes.
Dance. Um, well, maybe in the future we can we can touch base on Just Dance here on the podcast as well.
Yeah.
But like I said, we just watched the 12th episode together. Pretty enjoyable episode overall. Lots to break down in this one. We kind of had all these stories, all these individuals, all these people who we've seen throughout the show coming together to this one spot for the first time, with very few exceptions. I don't think there was really, and maybe one exception. Saw is one that we briefly mentioned with each other that didn't make a showing in this last episode, but basically everyone on Ferrix. It was really cool to see. Also, as a side note, I was wondering about this. Ferrix is the name of the planet, correct? Not the
I
city.
believe that's I believe that's
Do we
correct.
know the name of the city?
I don't know if we do. It's
Okay,
always been referred to as Ferrix, even when Marva was talking about,
right.
um, well, her Hollow was talking about, Ferrix fighting for Ferrix,
Yeah,
part of Ferrix. They're named the Daughters of Ferrix. I mean, I don't, yeah, I don't think that's
yeah,
ever been mentioned
right.
of what town they are in.
Yeah. One of the um one of the things I mentioned to you, I think, right as soon as we finished watching the episode together, which, by the way, if you're watching this and you haven't watched the reaction episode, that's uploaded in live right now. If you're interested in watching that after this one's over. Um, but something I mentioned to you was that the cinematicness, if you will, of this episode, I specifically wrote down, where did I write it? I said, um, I said opening of the episode felt very cinematic, meaning that
Hmm.
it felt more like I was watching like the climax of a movie rather
Yep.
than watching like an episode of a Star Wars TV show. So especially that first 10 minutes or so, I really enjoyed kind of that storytelling, the way they brought it all together.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, what was something I guess that stood out to you about early on in the episode?
I mean, really, just throughout the entire episode, I would agree with that cinematic feel to it, especially the whole sequence of the musicians coming down the two roads.
Hmm.
I mean, that had to be like 5 to 8 minutes long of that,
Yeah.
of them just walking down the roads while prepping first, doing their sound check, which you and I both said that sounds horrible right now, but I don't know, maybe it's supposed to sound like that. Um, French horns are canon now, apparently, in Star Wars.
Really like janky looking French horns.
Right, yeah, and flutes.
Hmm.
But yeah, that whole scene kind of reminded me of, actually, what is it, in Game of Thrones? the shame. You remember that whole when
Yeah,
they were walking,
yeah.
you know, had that kind of the slow walk through the roads there. And you and I mentioned a few times how great this just that whole set looks. Um, you know, it had some feel of wait, what did you say? You said it felt like you had seen it before, some of those stairs.
Oh, there
Just
was a certain stairwell that they showed in the episode that I thought it had reminded me of a scene on Canto Bight.
Canto Bite, that's what it was. Right, right,
Um,
yeah.
but there was a very
Which they did
specific
mention.
shot. Yeah, we
They
got a
also
Canto
did,
Bight reference.
yeah. When we find out that Perrin is has problems with the horses or likes to gamble a little bit too much. But yeah, I mean overall cinematically it was beautifully done. I believe this again we found out that this was directed by the same director that did the last episode as well as episode 7 of the series.
Which is so weird to
Um
me because I felt like episodes 11 and 12, especially 12, but 11 too, because it was helping to set up 12, I felt were way better than episode 7.
oh yeah, absolutely. 7, if you remember that one, that ends with them on the beach front and that's where Cassian gets caught. And that's where I felt kind of discombobulated and where everything was. So yeah, I think the 11-12 obviously arc was well done at the end here. It had to be, you know, this is what, and I think they came through. I think they actually absolutely came through. Just with how it all felt cohesive. You know, we had all of these storylines, like you said, come to a convergence in one spot, and it felt right. It didn't feel forced. I guess that's the big thing. You know, it made sense that we saw Vel there. It made sense that Luthen was there. It made sense that obviously Cassian was there. Karn, whatever. But for the most part, everyone else, you know, we agree that makes sense. But we still that question mark of Karn and Mosk being there. I'm
Was
not sure
questioning that a little
what's going on
bit.
here.
Honestly, maybe the most uncomfortable scene in the entire show so far happened in this episode towards the end with Karn. Like, and we can maybe, circle back to it if we want, but he saves Miro, and then they just have this really like awkward exchange. What does she say? She says something like, "I should thank
I should
you."
thank you. I should thank you.
It's like
Yes.
so weird.
And he's waiting like he's like, oh, don't worry about it. I'm like, oh, you want her to thank you. I see what's happening here, you know. But you could tell. I think what when things were getting bad and it looked like Miro was about to get hit or get shot at. I can't remember. Oh no, it was the bomb.
Yes,
It was the bomb that was thrown. That's when you see Karn take off, assuming that he was going to help out Miro.
right.
So you knew pretty much right away what his motivation was. I don't think that's his motivation to be there. Maybe it was. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
So I think it's okay that we're talking about this now because I'd rather talk about this now than later. So let's
yeah.
just yeah.
And I think, and we mentioned it while we were live reacting to it, but I think that kind of his role that he'll play in the second season, I would hope it's an elevated role from the first season. At least this exchange with Miro, like clearly Miro is now going to be. I don't. I think it'd be weird if they have them be romantically involved. Although it very
Mhm.
much seems like that's the direction that these two are headed.
Yes.
But I think he's definitely going to be kind of like brought into Miro's inner circle and be able to
Right.
um, help her. The only problem with him is he's not, as a villain, he's not intimidating. So it's
Right.
like, you know,
Yeah. I mean,
why should we
they've
fear
they
him?
they've humanized him.
Yeah.
You know, there was. I mean, up until this point, Miro is still very much a villainous type of character.
Hmm.
On the Empire side, but curiously enough, she was very, very um, vocal on how much she wanted Cassian to stay alive after all of this, which I doesn't really line up with everything that we've seen from the Empire. I mean, we saw
Hmm.
during this riot, they let loose on these villagers who basically did not have any way to fight back outside of rocks that were former residents of the of Ferrix.
So
And but you know they the stormtroopers let loose. They were blasters. They were super accurate, may I add, um,
yeah, this is the most
with
accurate
their
we've seen
shots.
stormtroopers, I think, ever.
And yeah, so her motivations, her leadership did not quite line up with what we've seen in the Empire up in this point. We've seen them, you know, shoot at villagers, defenseless villagers. We've seen them electrocute entire floors of prisoners. For her to say, "I want him alive," I'm not quite sure the motivation there. Is it to keep him alive to get to Axis? Maybe that's why. But from the actions that we've seen up to this point, it doesn't quite line up.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the reasoning. At least that's the reasoning I think we're led to believe is to get to Axis, like you said. The only other, road of thought other than the fact that she's doing it for the long game of getting to the person who's really in charge of the operation, um, that being Luthen. Well, we would assume is Luthen. I guess we still don't technically know that Luthen is
Mhm.
Axis, um, or that the person who the Empire or ISB thinks is Axis is Luthen. But the other road of thought that could go with Miro, and we mentioned this during our live reaction, is there's moments when I'm like, is she working for the Empire?
Mhm.
Like there's this long shot that she's this rebel spy. So that's an option as well, I guess. But I think more likely she's just kind of playing the long game for the ISB, trying to get to Axis, like you said.
Right, and we've talked about how that gray area is always the most exciting side.
Yeah.
Um, it's if it's black or white, you kind of know where people stand. But if it's in that gray area, you never know which side they'll end up on.
hmm
So maybe this is a case of that.
Yeah, and I feel kind of the same way about Karn, honestly. Like
Hmm.
he's not really in service to some sort of like greater, you know, good or greater evil. He's kind of just like he's wants to impress her. Like that
Yeah,
seems to be his character motivation right now, which
right.
for a Star Wars show is really weird, and I think that's why we have such like uncomfortable reactions to a lot of the things he does because it's like why is this in a Star Wars show? You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. Yeah,
So
and I agree. I mean, I understand that there is romance in Star Wars. That's fine. We have some great love stories, all through the trilogies. But
this almost isn't romance though. It's more like
yeah,
stalkerish
yeah,
vibes. You're
right.
like,
I mean,
I think that's why it's uncomfortable.
yeah, and I think the if it wasn't for their last interaction, maybe
Yeah,
yeah, it would have been little bit better. But knowing that happened already, it
right.
kind of tarnishes the entire idea of it
But
for me anyway. I
yeah,
know I do know that there are people that actually do want that to happen, which is fine. Everyone's each their own. But I just for me, yeah, I just the way that he approached her and the last time that they were interacting together, yeah, I didn't wasn't
it's
feeling that too much.
yeah, it's not so much that I don't want it to happen. It's that I don't know why I should care about it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like why
sure,
why
sure.
is this something that's being like kind of not pushed by the show, but it's clearly a plot point. Like they had the whole episode,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it was episode 8, 7 or 8 or
I want
something
to say
like
eight.
that.
Yeah,
Where he basically confronts her because he's more or less been stalking her. She's like,
yeah,
if you follow me, like I'll I don't remember what she says. I don't know if she says I'll have you killed or you'll never see the light of day
yeah.
or something like that. Um, but like nothing in that scene, other than this kind of weird visual exchange between the two
Mm-hmm.
of them, led us to believe that there would be something more than it was. But I guess
Right.
that's the the route they're taking. We'll see
Yeah.
how it ends in the
Like
second season.
we'll see. Yeah, we'll see season two. We'll see what happens in season two.
Yeah. Definitely not the most excited piece of season two. I'm looking forward to seeing.
Yeah.
That would probably be for me, just ultimately how the rebellion begins to form more so as a whole. One thing we should also touch on, which wasn't really, it was more the background of this episode. One of the first episodes of the show actually, where it felt like Mon Mothma wasn't, like where when she was on screen, I wasn't invested as that as the primary. story.
Oh, right.
And what I mean by that, like the few scenes she was in, it was ultimately like learning that her driver was spying on her for the other Imperial officer who's not a fan of Miro. I forget his name. Um, but so we
Blevins or Blevin, I think, or
Blevin, yeah,
Blevins.
that's right, yeah. And then so the Mon Mothma stuff in here was kind of just like stringing us along to the second season because there
Right.
wasn't anything of like huge
Well,
consequence.
so I wonder if the and I'll have to look. I mean, we only watched it one time, and so I'll have to watch that back. But I wonder if she knew basically that I mean, up to this point, she knows the driver is for the Empire. She already knows that up until this
Sure, but I don't
point.
think she knows that her conversation is bugged because when she asked for privacy, that's what I mean.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. Like, I wonder if that part was. I mean, although true,
Uh huh.
I wonder if she purposely talked about that at that moment
Oh,
to have some type of explanation to where money is going. You know,
interesting. I didn't even think about that.
because later on I think they touch on it when it's Blevin and that driver
Hmm.
where or whoever it was. Yeah, I think it was Blevin and the driver, and they mentioned like, oh, maybe that's where money has been moving around. They kind of touched on it a little bit, so maybe that was her motivation to talk about it at that moment. Because it really seems like Perrin, is that his name, the
Yeah,
husband?
the husband. Yeah,
Um,
might have a gambling
or
problem.
no, yeah, yeah, that whole thing. Maybe that had happened in the past, and she's just and he's like, no, actually, I really didn't. I'm really not doing this.
Yeah. So if it's a ruse, I didn't get the sense that he was in on it. If this is just
R-
something that she's kind of throwing out there to cast suspicion somewhere else.
Right. I think that marriage now is all for show
Oh
at this
yeah.
point.
Well,
So
yeah.
and especially in that situation, it's for show for the driver, for him to hear this conversation, to give her a shot at escaping the eyes of the Empire.
Yeah, and we see the evil banker guy come back at the end of the episode with his son and his wife, and I mean that's evidence of. I mean, the primary reason why Mon Mothma doesn't want this for her daughter is because she sees how it's turned out for her. You know, her
Hmm.
and Perrin went through the same process through the Chandrlin customs of being matched up and paired together, probably from a really really young age, and
Right.
clearly her marriage is not a happy one. Um,
Right. Yes.
so that was how the episode ended. Her daughter kind of had a look of like, "Oh, cool, he's a
Right.
he's
Yeah.
a handsome kid" or something like
Yeah.
that.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I think she probably at some point early in season two will either become distant or just flat out estranged or even on the run from her family. Or at least I
Mhm.
think she'll be forced to.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even be shocked if it's her daughter or her husband who ultimately is the one that reveals something or even turns her in potentially that
Yeah.
causes her to have to take that next step of fleeing, um, or fully joining the rebellion, I guess we could say.
Right.
And then of course back on Ferrex this whole time, which is the main emphasis of the episode. There is this preparation for the funeral march, if you will, for Marva. B2 Emo is there. Dude, that I love that droid.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say he's better than R2, and I wouldn't say that, but
Right.
I think I like him more than BB-8, and I think I like him more than
Dio.
um what was it?
Dio.
More than Dio,
Yeah.
and more than what's his name in Rogue One? The
K2SO.
yeah, K2SO.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think in my droid rankings, man, that'd actually be really tough to do that. We could do
Yeah,
that
that's tough.
sometime
That's a good
too.
video. That's a good that's a good video
We
right
could
there.
we could
Yeah.
do an episode of the pod ranking our favorite droids from Star Wars. Um, but he'd be high up there for me, maybe right behind R2 even.
Yeah, it's weird having a droid pull on the heartstrings as good as B2 Emo is doing right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the stutter or just the absolute neediness that they have for pretty much human interaction. That's kind of what it feels like.
Hmm.
That is an important feature of that particular droid. I don't know how you put that in the programming, but they
Right.
nailed it on that one.
He's
So
he's so
to see it,
humanistic.
yes, right, and um, you really wish the best for him, and that's when we talk about characters you want to that you are invested in somehow. In the pretty short time that we've actually seen, the droid, we really connect with him.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. B2 emo, quite the character, and
Yeah.
ultimately helps and allows Marva to deliver this post-death um monologue or announcement to the people of Ferrix, basically like being the she refers to Andor as the first spark. In many ways, she's the final spark, which leads this march of citizens to running forward at the riot shields of the imperial officers or the imperial soldiers.
Yeah.
But before I think we talk about obviously the big like fight scene, the big battle scene, a really really cool moment in this episode is we get information about why Cassian, all the way back in episode 2, I want to say, or maybe even episode 1, why he chose the name Clem to give to the Aldani rebels before that mission. We see this scene where it looks like someone like a childhood mentor, and we were watching. We love watching with subtitles, and
Yeah, yeah, right.
we saw it on the subtitles before we saw it actually
Yeah.
like visually as part of the episode. And it said Clem, and I was like, why are they referring? Maybe they're going back to Aldani and referring to him as Clem for
Hmm.
the subtitles. But then we see, this man who's building something or teaching
Hmm.
Andor about building. He's like, don't tell Marva.
Cleaning. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like,
Cleaning
clearly
the
they have
workshop.
some sort of bond.
Right.
Um, and so it was cool. We still don't really know who it is. All that we know
Right.
is his name is Clem. Um, but I actually I do have something to admit. So the past 3 months that we've been watching this show, every time we do an episode, especially for like the more out there characters, I'll look up a character list, right? And for the longest time, I kept seeing Clem on there, and I was like, why are they listing that as a separate
Yeah.
character? And now we know.
You're right. Yeah. Actually, I believe that he did have a short scene in a previous
Did he
episode.
really?
Yeah, it was a flashback episode. It was I can't remember who was talking, but I want to say it might have been Marva or somebody, because they were talking. I think it was when Marva was talking about going into the middle of the town just to, I don't know if she was causing havoc or
Hmm.
anything like that, or just remember, for a time she was not comfortable in there because the Empire was there, but then she decided, I wanted to go visit Clem or something very similar to that. And
Oh.
then there was a flashback, a very short one, but it was the one where um I want to say it was Clem and a bunch of villagers, and then it was the Empire on the other side. And you kind of
Oh.
remember that scene?
Yes. But do
Yeah,
they
yeah.
do they
So
mention him by name in that episode, or do they call him Clem?
I, I don't think in that scene they do, but the reference of whoever is talking about it does mention
Oh.
Clem or some point,
Good
or
catch.
maybe it was a subtitle thing where they say Clem says this or whatever. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, they definitely mentioned, we have seen him very shortly
Okay.
in a previous episode. But yeah, I mean, but to have him come up again in this episode,
Yeah, that was a
obviously,
cool touch.
it definitely helps. One, gives you an idea again, where the name came from, as well as, these are the types of stories that Cassian grew up with. These are the type of experiences he had. He had mentors, like you said. He had Marva. He had this Clem character. He had people watching him all of his life. But um, now that Marva's gone, now that Clem's gone, it's kind of up to him to, either continue that spark or let it die. And obviously, we know which way he goes.
Yep. Yep. Rogue One is a great movie. We gotta
Rogue One,
I gotta rewatch that
right?
sometime really soon.
So good.
Um, Another person who the episode calls back to, not visually, but we kind of get this almost like Obi-Wan Kenobi Luke sort of thing coming from Nemec. Uh, and I don't know if it's to Andor, it's more just like a voiceover on the episode, but he's
Hmm.
talking about like what it takes to start a rebellion, like why we start rebellions. Talks a lot about oppression. I think I wrote down one of the quotes. I said, he says, oppression is the mask of fear. So this is all part of his like his manifesto that he gave
Mm-hmm.
to Cassian, or I guess technically that Vel gave to Cassian
Right.
after Nemec died. But um, yeah, that was a very cool touch. I loved that piece that they included Nemec because he's honestly an important character in the formation of
Mm-hmm.
Andor's motivations. I think.
Yeah, and when we were watching, when they do the, this is what you've missed if you haven't watched the entire season type of thing, and they had a pretty good portion of Nemec and his
Mm-hmm.
death, and so I had a feeling that we were going to at least mention him at some point, but his manifesto, the things that he was talking about, how you just need to keep pushing. You
Yeah.
just need to keep trying. And I think that was one of the last things he said, just said try.
Mm-hmm.
And to when you are able to keep doing it over and over again from different places, eventually there will be progress in all of this. So to hear it from from his voice, I think it really, you know although he's not on the show anymore, he's still making that impact. This is what he wanted when he was writing the manifesto, when he was part of this rebellion, as opposed to the some of the other members that God, I can't even remember the guy that kind of that ended up flip flopping on everybody, and he just wanted to steal all the money, whatever the dude,
Right.
um, so I think to hear him and to hear Marva in the same episode like this, after their deaths, really gave inspiration. I mean, I was ready to go for a run after all that. You kidding me? Let's go. So it was inspiring, and it was good to have that callback.
Skeen, is that who you were thinking of?
Skiing, right, right, right. Yes, thank
Isn't that funny how like the first half of the season we're like, man, Skeen is going to be a huge part of this show.
you. Right.
But yeah, I totally agree. The inclusion of Nemec was in that opening cut of what to expect from the episode was a cool surprise to see for sure. I do. There's a large part of me that wishes we could have had more of him, but
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm you know the motivation and the fire that he provides for Andor I think is a really good mechanic that they use in the plot early on in the show. Um, Another, and I forget this guy's name all the time too. You're good at remembering his name because I know this is specifically one I always forget.
Is
Um,
it Brasso?
yeah, Brasso, yes. Brasso is the guy who kind of is carrying Marva's brick. And just as a reminder, for on Ferrex, they're cremated down, and then their ashes are kind of like mixed together with this mixture that forms a brick, and then their brick is placed in the road, and that's kind of like part of their funeral rites or their funeral ceremony, if you will. And so he is involved in this funeral procession. He's the one carrying the brick, but even prior to that, he's meeting with Cassian in secret before the procession has started, and he had a really great quote, or technically it was a quote from Marva, but Brasso's talking to Cassian. He's like, "I'm so sorry about Marva. She wanted me to tell you this," and he tells him exactly what she had lined out to say. And at the end, he says, speaking as Marva to Cassian, "I love you more than anything you could ever do wrong." I was like, "Wow, that's a pretty
Yeah,
powerful line."
that's a mother right there. That
Yeah,
is a mother.
yeah. And so that to me is like, all right, like Cassian is fully on board. He's a rebel now. Um, he's got the fire under him, both from Nemec, but I think even more so from Marva, whose speech on the B2 hologram was
Yes.
maybe the best part of the show, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I think it may not be a stretch to say that was perhaps the most moving moment of the show.
Well, let's remember, leading up into that moment, you had the two paths of horns coming through
Hmm.
with the musicians and the procession of all the people, which, by the way, was definitely more than the 40 allotted
Yeah.
by the Empire.
Maybe like 440.
Yeah, exactly. So, so there was already I even said it during our live reaction. I'm like, there's a lot of suspense here, because you hear the horns coming down, which I think, I think we both said it sounded very familiar. Maybe the Andor theme was kind of mixed into there as well.
Uh-huh.
But you had that. You had the bell ringer ringing the bell the entire time. You've got the slow walking, the perspective of all the different people, whether it was Cinta or Vel or Luthen who was there or Cassian himself. So that was building. You was building into this moment. And whenever they do this in movies, you reach this peak. You can't build it anymore, so something has to tip everything over, and that speech is what did it.
Hmm.
Is when uh, the villagers were decided, on Ferrix, this is where we make our stand, right here, right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was beautifully done. I'm really excited and interested and curious to listen and read some reactions to the episode last night, because it's funny. I feel like as Star Wars fans, we can normally get a pulse on the just the overall community of fans as to what the general sentiment will be from the episode. I would think that people loved this one. This was arguably my favorite episode of the show so far. I far and away really enjoy this episode, but I'd be curious to see if others felt the same way.
Yeah, and it gave us, unlike Lost, um,
We love that show.
it gave us. I mean, I know this is only season one. We'll keep going on. It gave us a nice stopping point for all the characters.
Hmm.
You know, um, whether it was, and I will say this: I didn't expect Brasso to be as involved as he is right now, because he kind of forgot about him for a good part of the season,
Hmm.
and then so I don't know if I'm curious about his character and his motivations and how he's gonna go through. Mainly because there wasn't really much talk of rebellion. I never in Bix, absolutely right. We kind of knew that right away. Cassian, of course, but with Brasso, he kind of seemed like the guy that was the wallflower. He would just blend in, do his thing. Is his involvement purely because of his relationship with Bix and with Cassian? I don't see the fight. I mean, obviously he was fighting in the middle of the in the street,
Hmm.
with Marva's brick, by the way, which I thought was great symbolism.
I think
Um,
yeah, I was gonna say there's some definite symbolism there.
right. Um, but up until that point, I mean, there wasn't really much of it, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the whole point. A lot of what Marva's speech was about was being asleep.
Mhm.
We've been asleep this entire time. We've let this all happen right in front of our eyes. And she said, if I could change it all, I would wake up earlier. And which is basically her call to arms to everybody at Ferrix to say, let's wake up, let's fight back, go fight the Empire. She blankly and as that was all happening, excuse me, that was all happening, I even mentioned, I'm like, why is the Empire just letting them do this? Surely they understand what she's talking about.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, they kind of slept. They were the ones sleeping on that. But I'll be interested in Brasso's character going forward, um, just to see his motivation. And even him on the plane, he was hesitant a little bit. He's like, "Why aren't you coming?" Or
Mhm.
when he's kind of sitting there, laying back, getting ready for the takeoff on the ship. There's a little bit of tentativeness. So I'm curious of what is to come with his character, and I'm excited to see I'm excited to see Bix out of that, that mental state that she's in now,
Mhm.
because I think you and I both believe that she's going to be a great asset going forward. Um, yeah, so it was Marva's speech there really just was that tipping point for everyone to come together and finally fight back.
Yeah, totally agree. What did you think of the stone and sky when they were chanting that? That's very Game of
I
Thrones esque too. It felt
Yeah,
like.
yeah, right. It is. And I was up until that point, and I even mentioned this. on her live reaction. I was like, "Oh, this is a very beautiful ritual, and very, very symbolic and everything." Until they got there, I'm like, "This seems like a cult now." I don't know. I just feel a little bit. I'd be worried if I were the Empire, and I just started to hear them chanting this. Um, but yeah, but yes, very Game of Thrones right there.
Hmm.
But it was it yeah, I loved it though. It's part of these traditions. Like I think about that. I think about on Aldani how they had the light show or however I forgot what they called it, but that whole ritual that they go through. I love how they're bringing in these different planets and their traditions into
Yeah,
Star Wars that maybe we never really had seen before.
sure. I mean, in you know, nothing against the original trilogy because I absolutely love the original three movies, but like that's definitely not something they would have delved into in
Hmm.
1977.
Right.
And so it is cool to see um, that perspective or that scope with Star Wars. Like you said, taking a planet and not just having it be the setting where something takes place, but really investing in the culture of the characters on that planet and the
Right.
rituals and I mean it allows you to understand and really gives more meaning to the plot, I think, if you think about it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it gives it more depth. It gives us
Yeah,
it
it's
makes it
more
more
real.
real.
Yeah.
Right. It's more real. You have there you go. You have different regions that have these, different values and to see it play out, I think it's great for just diversities, just to kind of see those differences and celebrate them.
Yeah, definitely. Could not agree more. Something that isn't like um wasn't a super big point in the episode because it just kind of like happened and I was like, "Oh, I guess she knows." Was when Cinta um we learned that pretty early on in the episode she is aware that Corv, I believe is his name, is a spy, as an ISB spy and not actually, a member of like a citizen or a rebel on Ferrix. And so um she confirms this when she spots him with Miro. And so that was also an early plot point. But I want to talk just briefly about Cinta as well. Um, she, at the end of the episode, it was funny because during the fight, the climax of the episode, I was like, where's Cinta during all of this? Because I think it
Mhm.
shows Vel at one point, but it doesn't
Mhm.
show Cinta. This is after they've had a conversation prior to the funeral procession. Um, and then at the end, we see Cinta confront who I'm pretty sure his name is Corv. If that's
I'm
incorrect, someone
pretty sure it
someone
is.
correct me down on the YouTube comments or something. But um, and she actually kind of like backs herself into a corner, and I'm like, why is she doing that? And then pulls out the little knife, and Corv is, we would assume, no more.
Right. One of the early things we learn about Cinta is she's the toughest one of them all.
Hmm.
And I remember when they said that, I'm like, we don't know anything about her though. And that was one of the frustrating things when we were all in Aldani was that they put her in this box. They said she's the tough one. And I'm like, we know nothing about her. She doesn't have any lines, and I just want to know more about her. She has proven time and time again that she is indeed the toughest one
Yeah,
that came out of Aldani and out of that team. Vel continues to be a little bit more on the hesitant side, not necessarily being all gung ho, and maybe that's that balance that those two need,
right.
that they need to have each other. Which I love the moment that they finally were back together, but you could still see that Cinta was game face. We got to do
Yeah,
this. Here's what we got to do. But Vel was much more like, hey, let's hang out for a little bit.
the mission is all that
um,
exists.
exactly. So, um, but yeah, Cinta's so awesome. I love her character now. I mean, honestly, that's where I was hoping Bix would be at this point,
Yeah.
if I'm being completely honest. But the fact that we have somebody uh that is in that role, that's just kind of like the brute, you know what I mean? Like just the person that just goes all in
Hmm.
and just full sends it every single time. And you kind of don't have to really worry about it. She's the stability. She's the rock you
Right.
think about it. You never really, when you see Cinta on the screen, you're like, oh, something's about to happen. You know, either something bad to the Empire is about to happen right now. So I think it's always good to have that support, that stable character where you just look at them and you're like, I know we're good. I don't have to worry about anything right here. So I'm glad that she has been so important to the plot point, and in all honesty, hasn't had a ton of screen time if you think about it, in comparison, because she doesn't have a ton of lines. There isn't much that she does, but whatever she does it well, and she is all, like you said, she is all about the mission.
Yeah. Yeah. I think she'll have both her and Vel will have a pretty large role to play in the next season too. So again, I wish Bix was. I think that's where we thought, like you said, Bix was going to be when the season started. But I think moving forward, it didn't really feel like they were phasing out any of the season one
Mm-mm.
characters. It was more like, okay, they're all going to have a bigger role next season, which is a cool feeling to have going into season two. Especially another one I think, which I think maybe the only character we haven't really talked a lot about during this episode, is Luthen. Luthen, who, by the way, the way they kind of showed his story in the episode felt a little weird to me. Like he came to the
Yes.
planet, was like, "I'm here to kill Cassian." He tells Vel, like, "We got to, that's when we'll kill him." And then like it didn't really, he wasn't involved in the battle really that much, and so
Right. He
it,
wasn't even looking for Cassian.
yeah, it didn't really show him like searching for him,
Yeah.
and then it just
Right.
ended, and he's like, "Well, I guess I have to leave the planet." You're like,
Right.
weren't you trying to kill him a second ago?"
I mean that, and we made a lot of Darth Maul references on the speeder he was on,
That
the
had to have
black
been
hoodie,
purposeful.
the all black hoodie that he had on with the hood, and um yeah, when you create characters, or when you have in movies, or where in movies, whoever is wearing the dark colors is normally the bad guy. you know and I'd like to look back at to see where his wardrobe kind of evolved over the season.
I don't even
If
remember him wearing
it's
that hood at
I
all
never
any other point.
well, right, I never remember him wearing that. But even just like the color scheme, if it was always
Oh
like more
yeah,
of a pastel or a gray, because I'm thinking about when he was in like that art studio, he was never in all black for sure.
right.
I think he had very, not,
Well,
I wouldn't say vibrant, but very like toned down colors,
yeah, same thing when he met
But
Cassian early in the show too.
mhm. But I mean, here he is in all black
Yeah,
with the hood, very ominous feel to it. And so his motivation there is just, all right, well, he's gonna, and we even mentioned in the live reaction, yeah, I don't think he makes it out of this episode. Maybe, I mean, it got to that point where you kind of knew obviously that he was ready there to kill Cassian, but but we know, so going into that, knowing that we know Cassian makes it out, does Luthen not, but yet again, he was one step ahead of us this time. Where, he just needed to hear it. Maybe he just needed to hear it from Cassian, at the end of the episode. Either you kill me or take me in. And I would assume take me in would be take me into what you're doing, the rebellion, you
yeah,
know? Um, and that's all he needed to hear for that. I feel like that's a pretty harsh way to get that message, Because I mean, what if Cinta or Vel found him first? You could have risked losing a huge resource to the rebellion.
yeah.
Um, but
Which
it seems like that's how Luthen is, just very a little bit extra, if you will.
yeah, which also I'm not convinced fully that Senta and Vel were going to kill Cassian if they found him.
Right.
I feel like that was more like Luthen telling them something and then being like, "Yeah, okay,
Mm, yeah.
yeah, I don't know."
Right. I mean, I Vel for sure. I don't know about Cinta though, man.
Senta
Cinta
probably would have
is
done it. Yeah,
Yeah, Cinta would have done it and would have walked away with the explosion behind her, that whole deal.
yeah.
So yeah, I think Cinta might have done it, but Vel for sure had some conflict with that.
hmm Um, but yeah, just overall a great episode. I think we covered most of the important points here. Moving into season two, what is your biggest or most hopeful expectation for season 2?
Well, I said I was going to share this information that I learned about season two, and it's not a plot point or anything like that, but it's interesting. I learned this from another podcast I listened to, Forced Toast podcast. It's two women who actually live in the Chicagoland area that also do a podcast about Star Wars, and
Oh, nice.
they know all the stuff. They are very knowledgeable. Um, but I learned from there that the episodes are going to do the same thing. They're going to have like 3 episode arcs, but each arc is a year apart.
Oh, which accounts
Yeah.
for, I think we talked about that in a previous
Hmm.
episode. We had talked about like I think it's a 5-year time gap between
Right.
now and, which makes so much sense. I
Yeah.
wonder if that will take away from the cohesiveness of the season 2 story.
Yeah, I'll be interested in how they make that work
Hmm.
because it's uh right, because those are literally, I mean, you're talking about arcs. I mean, that is a isolated arc, you know.
Yeah,
There isn't like how this season kind of moved into the next one. This is year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, you
right.
know, and then Rogue One. So I'll be interested in that. But knowing that now, um, there's going to be, you would assume that throughout the entire season, there's going to be a lot of progress, right? As far as the rebellion, as far as where things need to be leading into Rogue One and then ultimately New Hope. Um, so yeah, I wonder if we see. I wonder if we see Vader. I wonder if we see Emperor. I mean, these are very real entities now in this world.
Yeah,
Um, as much as I've enjoyed the quote unquote non Star Warsy type of show that we've seen,
right.
to introduce them now would I think would be fine. You know, you still got Hayden, you still have Ian. I think these are, and they don't need to be there every episode or anything like that. But you know, I feel at this point you've got to be you know you've got to realize and introduce that. You know, or
I,
do we see an Obi-Wan? Do we see, you know? I
mm,
mean, there's, you know, we are in that timeline now. This is
yeah.
where we are.
I,
So, but
I,
I mean, outside of that, with this group here, you know, the group that left on the ship, and now it looks like Luthen and Cassian are doing their thing. So we've got these two, um, kind of cells that are two groups that we have to keep up with. Obviously they're gonna. I'm like I said, I'm interested in Brasso. I'm interested in Bix and how they're. And I guess the pilot, I don't think we've ever seen her. She kind of
yeah.
popped up out of nowhere.
I don't know if that
Yeah.
was her name. It was close to that.
Right, yeah, she appeared to be maybe one of the daughters of Ferrix with
Yeah,
her what she was wearing,
that's what
right?
I assumed. Yeah,
Right. So, and of course B2 is on that ship as well. So we kind of have that group, and then we'll have Cassian and Luthen on the other side, and we still Vel and Cinta are kind of floating around in the middle of it. So, um, my favorite thing about these types of things is when they all meet together and where
yes,
they will be,
yeah,
like mentally, where they will be as far as their training, and you know where the rebellion will be as a whole. Because obviously Mon Mothma, where she gonna? I mean, there's so much that's gonna be that'll have to happen in this next season. So it's all except the Karn bromance thing. But other than that, I think everything else I'm just super excited for.
yeah. Me too. Just to briefly touch on what you said about the kind of bringing in, force sensitive characters to the show, what that would look like. I feel like, and I feel like it would set a precedent, um, no matter which direction they choose to go. And I think precedent has like too much negative connotation associated with it. What I mean by a precedent is that if they choose to include them, they're basically saying like, yeah, this was a cool idea to have a show that's really not focused on like the force and force sensitive people, and just like the average everyday person that contributes to the rebellion. If
Hmm.
they add like those force sensitive characters, and they're basically saying like, yes, this was cool, but ultimately like we need like what like the Star
Right.
Warsness that makes it Star Wars, which I wouldn't be mad about it. But I think at this point, if we haven't seen it, I would almost take the take that it would take away from the show too
Yeah,
much.
I would
Um,
agree with that though.
the one exception to that, I highly doubt we see Vader, unless it's at at the very, very end of season 2, kind of as like a special, like
Yeah.
there he is, as like something that's not super consequential to the plot. I could see them doing something like that. The one other exception I think would be the Emperor in a like
Emperor. Yes.
non-Sith way, as
Yeah, yeah,
the
right, right, yeah.
politician more so than
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the. So I think that's a real possibility in season 2. But as a whole, I think it may actually take away from the show, especially if they include that early on in season 2.
Right, yeah.
So
And yeah, and as much as and here's the realistic view of movies, TV and all that. I don't know where this is as far as like numbers goes. I have no idea. I don't look into that stuff. But I know within like, the Star Wars groups that I'm kind of a part of, yeah, we're definitely excited. We like the show and it was kind of slow to start, just like what you and I was discussed.
mhm.
But if we talk about the casual fans, and this is not gatekeeping in any way, um, are they watching this? Are they watching this show? You know, or did they watch the first 3 episodes and say, "Oh, not for me,"
Sure.
So I wonder if they will say, "Hey, we need to get more people, more eyes on this." Like I said, I have no idea of what the numbers are. So the reality is if they need to bring in the closer. They need Vaughn. You bring in Vader. You bring in some force sensitive users. You bring lightsabers. You bring moving stuff. You bring in moving rocks around.
Yeah.
And that's what sells. So hopefully, I mean, from a creative standpoint, I've very much enjoyed this entire series. There were some slow parts, as we've talked about, but I think we're at a point now, like you said, if they were to just throw it in like episode 1 of Vader fight, whatever,
You'd be like,
it would just
"What?"
yeah, it would be like what, why here, why now, and I hope that's not what happens, but like I said, they could always go to the well with that,
Mhm.
and um I think we would be fine with it to some extent, but then from a creative standpoint, you're like, oh, you kind of cheapened everything. You didn't need to go there quite yet. That is why Rogue One was so good because it really, and this is why I came up with this, is because that's what Rogue One was. Rogue One was completely about the rebels and their journeys, um, particularly with Jyn Erso and everything with her father, and so the Death Star, how it got, how they even came to know what the liabilities were with her, or how to destroy it. But at the very end, the last scene, you see Vader cutting up some rebels.
Yeah. Gotta give you a
Um,
little sprinkle, little taste at the end.
exactly. This is, but because that's the reality of this universe,
Mhm.
is that somewhere there's always going to be a lightsaber,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just do not be there when it happens. So I wonder, hopefully not early on, like you said, but either make mention of it or something. Uh, they are, like I said, in the timeline now that they would be in the right space to do it.
Mm. Well, final thought, final question. I think what's coming your way. What grade, what ranking would you give the episode?
A+. I'm gonna give the
Nice.
best one. Um, Mainly because, like I said, this was a satisfying season 1 finale for me.
Yeah.
Um, it hit on all the points. It dangled some things at the end. It gave a killer post-credit scene,
Yeah.
which we didn't even
Which we
talk
didn't even
about.
talk about yet. Yeah. By the way,
Yeah.
if anyone watched the episode and didn't watch the post-credit scene, there is a 10-second post-credit scene. Go watch it. I don't want to give too much away, but there is a pretty large um, reference to the original trilogy in that 10-second
Yes.
scene. So super, super cool to see. If you know what I'm
Pause
talking
this
about.
right now.
Yeah,
Go watch that. Come back right here.
exactly. But yeah, that was awesome too. But A plus,
Yeah.
huh?
Yeah, A plus. And to give it away, yes, the Death Star at the last post credit scene was kind of the building with the little spider droids. I've never seen those
Yeah, they
before.
looked like miniature versions of the things that attack Anakin's cruiser, or not cruiser, his
His
X-wing on, or
yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if it's an X-wing. It's not an X-wing, but
yeah.
you know what
His
I mean. His
speeder, yeah, yeah.
speeder, his ship
Starfighter,
on
Starfighter. I think it's
Starfighter,
Starfighter.
yeah, on
Yeah,
in episode 3 at the very beginning of that movie. It was like miniature versions of those, so that was cool.
yeah, yeah. So it was basically seeing the construction of what seems to be the final pieces
Yeah, like the
of
laser
the Death Star.
portion, sort of.
hmm
Uh,
So yeah, A plus. I loved where everything went. I was inspired by the speeches. Um, the cinematic feel of all of it was exactly what. And I was going in honestly. I was going into this not expecting this. I wasn't expecting what I felt when I got, mainly because of what we've seen up until this point. It didn't really have this feel. This was a very different tone, this entire episode, and where it was really kind of going on a high. The entire time you were going up, you were going up, you were going up. Where there was a lot of lower, I wouldn't say dull moments. They were necessary moments within this series, but there was a lot of dialogue. There was a lot of kind of stuff where it was important, great acting scenes, but not necessarily getting the heart rate going.
yeah.
The way they filmed this one, my heart rate was probably like sky high the entire time, just waiting for something to happen. So I very much enjoyed it. Easily my favorite episode of the series, and more importantly, gives me hope and excitement for season 2.
For sure. Yeah, I would agree. It was also my favorite episode of the series. I have just a little bit of, I guess, a little bit more cynicism with my grading. I would probably go with just what if I just was like, I'm gonna go D.
Can you imagine?
No,
My
I'll
favorite episode of the season, D.
yeah. No, I'll go with an A. I think the one thing that really like kind of, it didn't rub me the wrong way, but just kind of stood out in the episode is like, why was that portrayed that way? Was the whole Luthen sequence. Like, I didn't really
Yeah.
understand his role in the episode very well, other than the very end, which I thought was very important, actually.
Right. hmm
Um, so for that reason, I'll go A instead of A plus. But yeah, like we said, my favorite episode of the entire season of the show. Yeah, it was fantastic. I really really beautiful moving monologues from Marva, and then a shorter one from Nimic as well. Probably for me, what ultimately makes this my favorite episode is those two monologues. They're very impassioned. They're important to understanding the rebellion as a whole, and Andor's character. And so I'm going with a solid A. But Luthen's role redeemed itself at the very very end of the episode, I will say. So all
Right.
in all, really really good episode. And like you said, I think season 2 is going to be great. Another thing I should mention is that as at the time of this recording on November 23rd, if you have not seen any of Andor, and you for whatever reason don't have a Disney Plus account, the first 2 episodes of Andor will be showing tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on ABC. They'll be showing tomorrow night, Thursday, November 24th, Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way, everyone. They will also be showing at 9 p.m. Eastern on FX. And then on Friday, November 25th, they'll be showing the first 2 episodes on Freeform at 9 p.m. Eastern. And if you don't have any of those, or you don't have a cable TV subscription and you have a Hulu account, they'll be showing all or both of those episodes will be available on Hulu starting today all the way until December 7th. So really cool kind of crossover from Disney to kind of get this content out in front of other eyes. That way they can maybe draw more people in to watch the rest of the show on Disney Plus. So
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely. Go watch it.
go watch it. It's available on other platforms now, rather than just Disney Plus. Catch it on Hulu if you're interested.
Much
Uh,
like us.
yeah, yeah. And as always, if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions regarding Star Wars or otherwise, you can always either email us, hothhangout@gmail.com, with your questions or thoughts, as well as tweet at us at Hoth Hangout over in the Twitterverse. And always catch us live, not live, but catch the recordings, I should say, of both our reactions as well as our podcast episodes here on YouTube, or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or anywhere you get your podcasts. We really appreciate you listening or watching if you're on YouTube. Hi, YouTube. Hope you're doing well. And yeah, we appreciate you all. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't yet subscribed and you want to do that, we would really appreciate it. That would mean a lot to us. And yeah, hit the subscribe. And we are looking forward to a fun month of December. While there will not be a ton of Star Wars new content coming out, we have some fun ideas for podcast episodes. So stay tuned in the coming weeks. We should be back with another episode next week. We can let you know maybe over on Twitter before that episode goes live what that will all entail. But as I said, appreciate y'all for listening or watching. Lots to be excited about, both with Andor Season 2 in the future, as well as Ahsoka, Bad Batch, Mandalorian, and so much more. We look forward to covering and talking about it all. Joey, any last thoughts before we sign off for this final podcast episode covering the first season of Andor?
Fight the Empire!
Fight the Empire! Stone and Sky.
Stone and Sky.
What was the other one? It was not adrenaline. It was
serotonin.
No, it wasn't serotonin. It was it was the other brain hormone. Dopamine. That's what it was.
Dopamine.
Dopamine.
Nice.
Well, again, we appreciate you all, and thanks for listening. May the Force be with you.